And let's go ahead and bring it in here. Let me see if I can time it just right. Professor Marandi was also at the Islamabad so-called peace talks. So you get to hear about that as well. So I'll go ahead and bring that in, and I'll scooch myself to the background. And then afterwards, I'll come back and we will do a call in. My special guest, you've seen him here before, is Professor Mohammad Marandi. Welcome back, Professor Marandi.
Hi, Sabrina. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So I know a lot has been happening in the past 48 hours. On Saturday, there was this said peace negotiations that was happening between the United States government and Iran in Islamabad, Pakistan. And from what I saw, there was a video of you being interviewed by a reporter there. So you were present. I want to get your perspective about these so-called peace talks. Many of us thought it was kind of strange. Number one, JD Vance was there, so we knew this was like a fluke to begin with. But the fact that Trump sent once again Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who don't really, they're not serious about peace. To me, it's just an effort to try to stall and give them time so that they can regroup, reload, and continue on with slaughter. That's what I've seen from the past. But you were actually there, so I want to get your perspective about that. What were people saying? What were people saying from the Iran side during those talks?
There were 5 rounds of negotiations, and Trump kept moving the goalposts. Witkoff, the person who you rightly point out to be an Israeli firster, and who, along with Kushner, doesn't really care about U.S. interests. But Iran did those negotiations even though it was highly skeptical. And Iran was not caught off guard, contrary to what people think. Iran was expecting an attack. Of course, Iran didn't know what day or what hour, and the Israeli regime used American technology and struck targets and murdered senior commanders. But Iran knew something was coming. It may have been mistaken in not evacuating certain places beforehand, but it knew that there was going to be war. But they wanted to negotiate, mostly so that Iranian people and people across the world would know that Iran tried. Because if you go to war and your people are being killed, and then suddenly the enemy starts saying, well, you could have prevented this war if you had negotiated. And then that would raise questions, even though it would have been, in our case, an illegitimate argument, but it would have had an impact. And so, in order to strengthen national unity and to mobilize global public opinion against Trump in the United States, against the Israeli regime and Netanyahu, they did negotiate. This same thing happened before this war. Iran was negotiating with the United States. The foreign minister of Oman said great progress, significant progress had been made. And then the United States attacked anyway. And Iran, again, was ready for attack. It didn't know when or what day or what hour the attack would happen, but it knew that there was an attack on its way. And of course, as I think I've explained before, Ayatollah Khamenei refused to leave his office and his home because he said that ordinary people have nowhere to go. Many ordinary people, they have nowhere to go. So I'm staying I'm staying put. So he basically sacrificed himself because he didn't want to be treated differently than others. But Iran also then knew that war was imminent, but it negotiated again so that the Iranian public would know that Iran went that extra mile or extra kilometer, and that international public opinion would know that. And I think that's had a huge impact on the perception of what's going on. I'm not saying it alone had a huge impact, but it did have a significant impact. And I think it's clear that across the global majority, people support Iran. And even in places that I would never expect I would never have expected they support Iran in this war. Far off places that know very little about the country and only have heard the anti-Iranian propaganda for the last 47 years. So this time around, it's the same thing. When we were going on the way there, on the flight at the airport, in the hotel, everyone who I spoke to was highly skeptical of the possibility of an agreement. But if there was an opportunity to bring about a, a just peace, they were going to try. But at the same time, they wanted to be seen by the Iranian people and people across the world as having tried. And I think everything played out as expected. During the day, the negotiations went not they didn't go badly, but then by nighttime, I think the third round of negotiations, suddenly the Americans became very hard-lined and very uncooperative, and the negotiations went south. I think that's how you put it in English. And then they were supposed to have more negotiations the next morning, but suddenly in the middle of the night, Vance goes and says the negotiations have failed. He tried to imply that Iran was insistent on trying on having on pursuing a nuclear weapon, which of course is a lie. I mean, Joe Kent basically admitted that in his resignation letter that Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapon. So this was just an excuse, not and which I'll get to the reason for that in a bit. And so the Iranians tried, and progress was made, and then suddenly the Americans walked away. They became uncooperative, and then they walked away. What happened? Well, during the day, the Iranian delegation never made any phone calls to Iran. The Speaker of Parliament who led the delegation had full authority. He had spoken to Ayatollah Khamenei, the leader, before the trip, and he negotiated. Vance, even though he was surrounded by two Israeli firsters, Kushner and Witkoff, so they were basically in control, he was constantly making phone calls. And one of the people that he was calling was Netanyahu. And Netanyahu later said that Vance would call him and report to him. And I find it, and everyone in Iran was astonished to hear that, to know that Vance was calling Netanyahu. And of course, Netanyahu would never want a peace deal. He wants more war. He wants a global crisis to intensify. But also for Netanyahu to say he reports to me, I find that amazing that he would speak that way. And I think Americans should be deeply offended that their vice president has to report to this puny colony. But in any case, Israel didn't allow this to happen, the peace to take place, for an agreement to come about. And that is for the same reason that Joe Kent resigned. Because Joe Kent said in his resignation letter that this war is because of the Israeli lobby, not because of an Iranian threat, not because of a so-called nuclear weapons program, which was, as he admitted, non-existent. The Israeli lobby wanted it, the Israeli regime wanted it, and they got it. And so it's obvious that the same forces would try to prevent any real agreement. So ultimately, from the Iranian perspective, it's not Trump who's in charge. It's Netanyahu and the Zionists. So the Iranians are continuing. They're preparing themselves for war as we speak. And the global energy crisis continues. And by imposing this blockade on the Persian Gulf, what Trump is doing is he's intensifying the energy crisis. And I think it's going to hit the world very hard and even faster than expected because of Trump's policies. And it's not going to work. Trump is going to fail because, first of all, the Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf are much more vulnerable than Iran to a blockade. They only have oil or gas. And Iran, on the other hand, has agriculture. It has its own industries because it's been sanctioned. It's very much, in many ways, self-sufficient. and it has many borders and many neighbors that it can use to do trade with, and it trades with it include country, it borders countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, through the Caspian Sea, Kazakhstan, Russia, then Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, and Iraq, the Persian Gulf aside. So Iran has all these countries to do trade with, and Iran has made a lot of money in the last few weeks and last couple, 2, 3 months. During the buildup of U.S. forces in the region, the price of energy went up. And during the last month and a half, Iran has been exporting oil. And also Iran had 200 million barrels of oil on the seas that it sold about half of it. And it now still has 100 million barrels that it can sell at a very high price. And in general, there's very little oil now on the seas that the Russians apparently have finished. So the crisis is going to hit. Iran is still selling oil. And as you pointed out, the Chinese said that they're not going to be blocked by the Americans. They're going to do their trade with Iran in the Persian Gulf. And so Chinese ships are going to go back and forth. The Iranians are calculating that the Americans are going to, the world economic crisis is going to hit. It's going to hurt Trump. Netanyahu and Trump are going to be blamed by the world. And the world is going to put pressure on the United States and the Zionist regime. And U.S. allies are going to be hit very hard. Korea, Japan, Australia, Europe, India, which was so supportive under Modi of Netanyahu. Netanyahu, through this war and the prevention and by preventing peace, is wrecking the Indian economy. Obviously, he doesn't care about India. So we are where we are. The situation in the region is very dangerous. And the Israelis are carrying out a genocide in Lebanon as we speak. They're slaughtering people 24 hours a day. And Western media is looking away, just like they did in Gaza. It's even more sinister than in Gaza, because in Gaza they had the fake excuse of not having journalists in Gaza. They have journalists in Lebanon. But they lie in their reports, and they say, like, Israel is bombing Hezbollah strongholds or Hezbollah hits. And I've spoken to some of these reporters, and I say, why are you saying this? They have, two reporters. And I said, you know what's going on in Lebanon. And he said, no, well, yeah, in both cases. They said that, it's not us. And we write, and then the editors go and change them. I said that this is not moral. This is not an excuse. These reports are being done in your name, and you're whitewashing the genocide. But, that's how it works. These people they work for the Epstein class controlled media, and they help justify the ongoing genocide. So we have a very dangerous situation, but I think the global economy is moving very swiftly towards a catastrophe. Not just oil, not just gasoline, refinery products, or petrochemical products, but also LNG and fertilizer. It's going to get bad.
Yeah, I've been watching the numbers and I've noticed the difference as well. I think it's important for people to fully take in what you just said about JD Vance calling Benjamin Netanyahu. I saw the video of Netanyahu circulating around on X and him saying that that JD Vance was reporting to him. And that should give everybody who lives in the US, that should give you pause. The fact that JD Vance is reporting to Benjamin Netanyahu. So that right there lets you know who's running the show. After those talks on Saturday, Donald Trump decided to implement a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, right? And he basically said that he's not going to allow any of the ships to go through there, as if it's his to block. And it seemed as though the idea was to get those ships to come towards the United States and get oil or buy oil from the United States. So for one, we don't have that amount of oil that exists in the Strait of Hormuz. We're not built like that. So there's only so much that they can get. Two, the fact that Donald Trump decided to do this, it makes me wonder if this was a part of the plan all along. If we're going all the way back to Venezuela, kidnapping Maduro and trying to seize oil in Venezuela. Now I'm starting to wonder if all of this, along with the Epstein files being released, if all of this was some type of effort to get other countries not to depend on the Strait of Hormuz and to get oil from the United States. What do you think about that, or do you think maybe Trump's not that smart?
Well, Trump is definitely not very smart, and he's not very sane, and he's a psychopath. But they don't have that. So I mean, you're right. They don't have that sort of oil. The United States is exporting what it has, and it's not as if it's just like keeping oil. I mean, it's not as if they have this capacity to export 10 extra, 15 extra million barrels a day, and they're not using it. And the same is true with LNG and fertilizers and the petrochemicals and helium, which is very much in demand for AI and chips and that sort of thing, and fertilizer. So the United States can't replace the Strait of Hormuz. It will take, I don't know, trillions of dollars of investment to do that, and the oil and the energy in the United States is much more expensive anyway. So we are heading for a global economic crisis. Billionaires in the United States who are in the oil and gas industry are obviously going to be making a killing, but American consumers and businesses, they're going to be hit very hard by the prices that go through the roof, and U.S. allies are going to be hit even harder, like the Europeans and who've already been hit hard because of the war in Ukraine. This is not going to end well for Trump, for the United States, for anyone. This is going to be bad for everyone. But Netanyahu is pushing for it. We could have had the Strait of Hormuz open during the last few days, but Netanyahu prevented that. And the whole war was because Netanyahu wanted more aggression, more murder, more slaughter. This is all, I think, the real plan. I mean, I'm sure that the real plan is what the U.S. ambassador to the Israeli regime said in his interview with Tucker Carlson. And that is that the Israeli regime, if they take the region, that's fine. The ultimate goal is for the greater Israel. And so the only country that's standing in the way is the Islamic Republic of Iran and the axis of resistance. Everyone else is in the U.S. camp. And the proxies of the United States. Turkey is not going to do anything. Syria has already been destroyed by the CIA and the regional countries that helped the CIA destroy the country and weaken the axis of resistance. And Saudi Arabia and Jordan, Egypt, they're all U.S. proxies. And when the U.S. ambassador said that what he said, they just signed a statement condemning it. But no one in Washington punished him. No one rebuked him. He was not removed. So obviously that is U.S. foreign policy. And that is what the Israeli regime is doing. They're annexing right now parts of Syria. They want to annex huge parts of Lebanon. They're flattening southern Lebanon just like Gaza. And again, the West is fully supportive. There are no sanctions against the Israeli regime, nothing. I mean, they can carry out genocide for year after year, and the West is fine with it. The Europeans are fine with it. European journalists are all fine with it. Everyone wants to focus on Iran so that the Israeli regime can get away with its genocide.
Yeah, but Iran is fighting back, and I do want to show people the statement that came through from the the IRGC Navy. Shout out to Dropsite News for this one. Any attempt by military vessels to pass through the Strait of Hormuz will be met with a harsh response. Announcement by the command of the IRGC Navy. The IRGC Navy fully and powerfully controls the intelligent management of the Strait of Hormuz. Passage is allowed only to non-military vessels under specific regulations, and reports about American vessels passing through the strait are false. And any attempt by military vessels to pass will be met with a firm and harsh response. I do want to ask you about this. There were several reports from Western media that were reiterating Donald Trump's claim that the U.S. ships were passing through just fine the other day in the Strait of Hormuz. But the statement here from the IRGC says obviously the opposite, that that is not the case. What was happening there?
First of all, Sabrina, I should point out to your audience that Western media, when it comes to the empire, they're all the same. There's no difference between The Guardian and Breitbart. There's no difference between Fox News and the BBC. So when they want to attack Venezuela, no one is going to say the United States is a criminal regime. They'll either support the attack, or if they oppose it, they'll justify it. They'll say, yes, the regime is evil, but we shouldn't do this. No, if they had any more sense of morality, they would say, no, you are evil. If anything, Maduro should carry out regime change in Washington. The United States is in no moral position. It's in no higher moral position than Venezuela. It has no higher moral status than Venezuela or the Venezuelan government. And the same is true with Iran. In fact, in my opinion, Iran is infinitely higher when it comes to morality than the collective West, as we see in Gaza, as we see in Lebanon and elsewhere, Western propaganda aside. They support genocide. Iran opposes it. So everything else, we should look at it from that perspective and question Western narratives. But so none of them are trustworthy. They may use different language. Some may be more subtle. Some may be more bombastic. But they're all empire. They have internal differences. But when it comes to the other, they're more or less the same. So no chip went through. But there are two interesting things that happened during the negotiations. One was this claim that U.S. ships were coming in, and they did try to get in, but they were blocked. And the Iranians put the footage out there to show that the Iranians threatened the American ships, and there were drones flying, and the Americans backed off. And this was happening during the negotiations. So it was an attempt, I guess, to intimidate the Iranians or to gain the upper hand at the negotiating table, which actually does the opposite. The Americans constantly think that if you punch people and if you pound people and if you insult them, you're going to get more. No, you're going to get greater hostility. You're going to get greater resistance. At least when it comes to Iran and the axis of resistance, that's how it works. I mean, the Americans are used to getting their way with other countries, threatening them with tariffs and so on, and getting concessions, but that's not how Iran works. And that's not how the axis of resistance works. The second issue, Sabrina, is the the Washington Post opinion piece that was published at that time, saying that Iranian negotiators should be murdered. So the Washington Post was advocating the murder of us, those of us who flew to Pakistan. And we were all thinking that on our way back, we're going to get killed. And it's really interesting how the West now works, that the media competes with the regimes themselves in advocating crimes against humanity and pushing for mass murder, which is understandable because they're all controlled by the Epstein class. Actions, but that's just who they are. They have no morality. Just like when they bombed the Iranian school, murdering 168 little girls, no one took responsibility. No one apologized. It was intentional because it was the first wave of attacks, and they had lots of time to vet all those in the first targets. That school was well known. It was there for years. And all the apps showed it. All the maps showed it. A lot of the kids were the children of military officers, and that's probably why the Americans struck them, to teach them military a lesson, kill their kids and teach them a lesson. But in any case, I mean, no one should be surprised because they've been slaughtering people across the board. They're slaughtering families every single day in Lebanon. Every single day. Family after family is being slaughtered from morning to night. Their buildings are being bombed. Their apartment blocks are being bombed. And, the Western media is trying to look away as much as possible to facilitate this. So no one should be surprised about any of this. But the fact that these ships were trying to enter the Persian Gulf, and the Washington Post was simultaneously threatening the negotiators, was an attempt to put pressure on Iran. And it didn't work. The guards pushed them back, and the negotiators were steadfast. They would not accept U.S. demands, as Vance would say. They didn't accept our demands. Of course, Iran will not accept your demands. Iran is Iran. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's a, we discussed the Shia ideology and mentality before. This resilience and resistance against oppression and against the oppressor and support of the oppressed. It's key. So of course it's not going to work. But so after the negotiations, when we were flying back, we were expecting to be killed. It was something that all of us were thinking there's a high chance of that. Now the flight didn't go to Tehran. As soon as they entered the border, it swiftly landed in near the border of Pakistan and of Afghanistan and Turkmenistan in the city of Mashhad. So in case the Americans or the Israelis wanted to bring down the flight near Tehran, they landed far away, and then some took a train, some took buses, some took cars, and got back to Tehran. But in any case, this is how the United States functions. The media tells the government, kill them, murder the negotiators. And this is the world that we're living in today. It is the law of the jungle. And the Fifth Estate is just as sinister as the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, and it's very interesting too, because I thought about that when I saw that you were there at that event. I was like, are they protected? That's what I wondered, like if you guys were protected, going there or even coming back. I was wondering about that because I was like, what if, Trump tries to or Israel tries to go after them right at this event? Like you never know. But I think that something else has started to happen. And see, Donald Trump's policies and decision making here is actually causing more support for a multi-polar world. And I'll get into that a little bit about what just happened with Spain. But China apparently was able to, again, get through. And this is another thing. It really is an embarrassment. I think they are embarrassing the United States here. The Chinese tanker that was sanctioned by the U.S. crossed the Strait of Hormuz despite the blockade. So the name of this tanker is called the Rich Starry. And it was the first to exit the Gulf since the U.S. blockade began, carrying a methanol from the UAE. So this is a big one. If I was Trump, he should be embarrassed. And you can track it yourself for people who are wondering how people are finding this information out. If you go to marinetraffic.com, this is where I can see this information. So you can see the Rich Starry. It shows it's right here at this point in time. Position received 30 minutes ago. So you can see the activity that is happening within this area. But I think this says something here, Professor Marandi, which is that it shows, of course, that Donald Trump is lying as usual, but it also shows that China was still able to get through.
Yeah, that's right. And also, the opposition leader in Taiwan traveled to China and met the Chinese president. And it is clear that the U.S. defeat against Iran in the war and against the axis of resistance and the rogue nature of Trump and the fact that he used up all his military resources across the world in this fight against Iran has not gone unnoticed in East Asia. And then Taiwan is looking and seeing how the U.S. is depleting its capabilities in West Asia, all for the sake of the Zionist regime, and that the United States is unable to defeat Iran after 40 days of war, thus losing the war effectively. And they say that, well, we should no longer be completely reliant on the United States. We have to rethink our policy towards China. And I think that this is something that we're going to see elsewhere too. We're going to see, like in the case of Spain, and I think you're going to see more of this with South Korea and other European countries. People increasingly are going to tilt further away from the United States. They'll be less fearful of the United States. And what Trump has done is that I mean, the U.S. empire was on the decline, and its decline has been increasingly picking up speed. But this war, I think, was a turning point. I think this was probably, so far, it's not over, but this was the most important defeat for the United States, in my opinion, since the Second World War as an empire, even more so than Vietnam, though it was much shorter, but it was highly symbolic. Again, it's not over, but this is the unipolar moment, or it was, and now the empire came in with arrogance to crush the enemy, and it failed. It failed to do anything. And after 40 days, the Iranians were firing missiles and drones day and night, and they were destroying U.S. assets. And then it was a coalition. It wasn't just the United States. It was these 5 dictatorships in the Persian Gulf. It was Jordan. It was the collective West. Basically, they all cooperated. They didn't send troops, but they cooperated in every other way. And of course, there was the Israeli regime. Even countries like Turkey, AWACS jets were flying overhead over Turkey to gather intelligence against Iran, NATO jets, and US bases were used there. The Republic of Azerbaijan. But despite that, the war, they failed. And so I think that's going to cause countries to rethink U.S. power, thanks to Trump's crazy foolishness and his arrogance.
Yeah, do you think that Donald Trump seriously thought that China was just going to say okay? Because China does have business with Iran. You think he really thought that China was just going to say, okay, we won't do that then?
You would know the answer to this better than I. And so I would rather you answer that question. But my understanding is that the leaders in Washington live in a bubble. These senators and these, and they're all Zionists, and they're all captured by the Zionist lobby or controlled by the Zionist lobby, whether it's because of the likes of Epstein or for other reasons, or a combination of reasons. The American public has turned against the Israeli regime. These people are bound to the Israeli regime. They support genocide. They support slaughter, but they also live in this bubble where they are the hyperpower, and they determine the future of the world. But outside of that bubble, there's a very different world that's emerging. And so I think that it's not just Trump. I think even Trump's opponents among elites are living in an alternative reality. They admit this at times, especially when they're attacking Trump, but that arrogance is still there. In the case of Trump, it's more, and maybe he's more foolish than others, but that in general, that sense of exceptionalism and superiority and having exceptional rights, that is very much, that continues to exist in Washington. Maybe, across the United States, I think things are changing very fast, but in Washington, that sense of exceptionalism is very much in place.
Yeah, and I want to show people what this looks like now because, again, shout out to Spain for being the one to really want to go there and do it. But for those who have not seen, this is what is happening. Xi Jinping has been meeting with Pedro Sanchez. Pedro decided to go meet with him in person and said, let's try to work together. China and Spain are both principled and reasonable countries. We are willing to stand on the right side of history. That was a summary of the conversation there, because this is this is not in English when he's speaking. But it says we should oppose the law of the jungle and together maintain a true multilateralism and protect world peace and development. And so this has really, essentially pushed Spain into the arms of China here, because Spain was, it seems like, the first European country I saw that basically told the U.S. and Israel to kick rocks, and that they were not going to support the U.S. aggression and Israel aggression with the Iran war. But the statement that he made is today, President Xi Jinping, I have confirmed that the bond between Spain and China emerges strengthened following this official trip. In a world that is increasingly uncertain, Spain is betting on a EU-China relationship based on trust, dialogue, and stability. We must continue advancing towards a multipolar order built from respect and pragmatism. So Donald Trump's actions is actually helping like this multipolar world. Because otherwise, I'm not sure that Spain would choose to go do this had it not been for, all this pressure that was put on him and other NATO leaders that they needed to step in here and help the U.S. Fight against Iran. It was just unbelievable. And this makes me wonder if more European countries might be willing to do the same because they need to get oil. They need to take care of their people. And they're going to look at it as though, like, why should people in my country suffer because the U.S. and Israel decided to start a war with Iran?
And because they choose to continue carry out genocide and extend and expand the genocide from Gaza to Lebanon now.
Yeah. And I wonder, Professor Marandi, Benjamin Netanyahu, he made this threat towards Erdogan in Turkey. Basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically saying that we can come for you too. And Turkey,
Well,
they issued a response, but I mean, it's just like, does 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 Erdogan really believe that Turkey will be spared? Because Turkey was one of the countries that was mentioned in one of the emails in the Epstein files. That was one of the countries that they were looking at even back then.
well, Erdogan helped the Israeli regime a lot, and so did his party. And there's no hiding that. They were involved in the CIA dirty war in Syria. If Syria, if there was no dirty war in Syria, today the Israeli regime would be having a much more difficult time in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in Syria. And but in addition to that, he continues to export or transport oil from Baku, cheap oil and expensive oil, to Netanyahu, enabling the genocide for the 2.5 years. Um, he and other regimes in the region have done great harm to the cause of the Palestinian people and the people of Lebanon and elsewhere because they did not take any real steps against the Israeli regime. He could have cut the oil. He could have broke off all ties, intelligence ties, military ties, everything. And when Erdogan doesn't do this, and the others like Sisi and Abdullah and Jordan don't do these things, or these dictatorships in the Persian Gulf don't do these things, then how can you expect Latin American governments to break off ties or African countries to break off ties when regional countries don't do that? So they have done a huge service to Zionism and a huge disservice to humanity, and they are not going to be spared. In fact, the country that is least threatened by the Israeli regime is Iran, because Greater Israel doesn't impact Iran directly. It would be a threat because it is a, it is a genocidal regime. It is a supremacist regime, and anyone who is not a Zionist is, of course, subhuman. So obviously, countries that surround the regime will be treated with contempt, and their people will be treated with contempt. But Turkish territory, Syrian territory, Saudi territory, Egyptian territory, all of them are directly being threatened by this expansionist regime. As the U.S. ambassador to the regime, Huckabee, said in his interview with Tucker Carlson, when he said, if the Israeli regime takes the entire region, it's fine for us. That's the policy. That's the real policy. But still, none of them, at the time when the regime is, at war, when they could help Lebanon, they could help Iran, they could help the Palestinians, but they didn't. They haven't. They've all been quiet. They've only provided lip service, allowed people, their people to demonstrate for soft power purposes, but they've actually in reality done the exact opposite. Qatar allows Al Jazeera to to criticize the Israeli regime, but Qatar, so they some of them pretend, some of them don't even pretend, like the Emirates, which is an ally, open ally of the regime. But in reality, these Turkey under Erdogan, I mean, it's not public opinion. Public opinion across the region is hostile towards the regime. But the regimes are bound to the United States. Now, as the threat grows, many of them will become more uneasy. But if they were smart, they would shift their position now. If they were moral, they would have done it 2.5 years ago.
Saudi Arabia is on that greater Israel map. A part of
Absolutely.
Saudi Arabia is carved out. Do they
Well,
not?
all these,
And Jordan.
yeah, all these princes and kings, if their regimes collapse, they have their palaces and their many billions of dollars, if not altogether trillions of dollars, in Western banks and in the West. They'll just leave. They don't, they're not. I don't think they're going to resist. They're not like Hezbollah. They'll just walk away, and these territories will be taken. Unless something changes, unless the region changes, unless there is regime change as a result of the weakness of these regimes and the collapse of U.S. Hegemony. Who knows what will happen in the months ahead? But so far, none of them are doing anything for the Palestinians or the Lebanese or to resist the Israeli regime, except for in the case of Erdogan and Qatar and one or two others just providing lip service, which really is useless.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with journalist Rania Khalek from Breakthrough News. Rania had to
From
leave.
afar.
Okay. For those who are not aware, Rania is physically based in Lebanon. She's lived in the US and she's lived in Lebanon. But from what I saw recently, it seems like she had to leave because of the bombing. Because like Israel's just, especially southern Lebanon, bombing heavily. I also thought it was kind of strange that it was pointed out on social media that Apple Maps, and I checked it on my phone too, that Apple Maps was showing that all of a sudden the towns in southern Lebanon are gone. They're not even there.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
On
They've intentionally removed the names in cooperation. Yeah, I sorry, I misheard you. Yes, I do know her. Actually, I think I'll be on her show in a couple of days. Yes, they are ethnically cleansing Lebanon, and the Western media is hiding it from everyone, and they're removing the names from the maps on U.S. map on U.S. apps to prepare the ground for the ethnic cleansing of Lebanon. This is what Greater Israel is about. This is what it means. These are the chosen people. They're the master race, and everyone else is Amalek. It's not just the Palestinians who are Amalek. It's everyone. And that's why, for example, the Israeli regime right now is wrecking the global economy. They don't want peace. They don't care about Indians. They don't care about the Chinese. They don't care about uh, South Koreans or Argentinians or Brazilians or people in Niger or uh, Zimbabwe. All those economies can crash as far as they're concerned. They don't care about the United States. They want this war. They want to force the United States to do their bidding. And of course, the vice president reports as every day to Netanyahu. And that's it's because they're the chosen people.
it all comes back down to supremacy. This is why I was warning people about this whole chosen people thing. Like it when you have been conditioned, you've been brainwashed for years from the time that you're a child that you are chosen. It gives you this perception that there's nothing that you can do wrong, that you can do whatever you want to do, right? Like like that's what it does. Because it's like they're never going to see, and people have to understand this because I'm seeing people start to try to make this pivot now and say, well, it's okay if we vote for someone who takes money from J Street because they don't want the US to give weapons to Benjamin Netanyahu. But what they're really saying is that Israel can purchase those weapons from the US and that they won't be handed over to them anymore, but they can still purchase them. But people have to fully understand that there is no good pro-Israel lobby. I was like, I don't
No,
know. You know,
it's yeah, it's just like saying the pro-Nazi lobby. Whether we do, is the pro-Nazi lobby, called uh, the J Street, Nazi lobby or some other name. This is a supremacist regime, and it is utterly evil, and it is far, far worse than apartheid South Africa. I mean, Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, who was one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement. I'm saying this because your younger viewers may not know this, but he was a leading figure. He was like after Nelson Mandela, probably the most famous, not necessarily the most important, but he was the second most famous um, person in South Africa uh, after Nelson Mandela, and outside of the country. And he, after the fall of apartheid in South Africa, he visited Palestine. And this is way before the ongoing genocide. This is many years ago. He said the situation in Palestine is far worse than anything that he'd ever seen in South Africa. I'm paraphrasing, people can look it up. But he said it's far worse. Now it's infinitely worse. And they're doing the same in Lebanon, and no one is talking about it. It's like it's finished. No, there are no longer these protests across Europe. The hundreds of thousands. They were able uh, to halt that momentum with the fake ceasefire, and now it's just continuing. And now they're doing what they did to Gaza to Lebanon, and people are not coming to the streets. They've just moved on, and that's something people have to think about. They have to remobilize populations across the United States, across Europe, and across the world. I mean, the Arab world is indifferent, and Arab regimes and Turkey are not going to do anything. But the only thing that can do anything is people power, because we saw that they was scaring the Israeli regime and the Epstein class at the height of the protests shortly before the fake ceasefire in Gaza.
well said. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Sabrina. It's always a pleasure.